and Associates. We're a strategy and communications training and consulting firm designed to or focused on enabling businesses, brands, organizations, and institutions to achieve their desired objectives through strategic communications, reputation, risk management, and organizational effectiveness. So I have been doing a series of videos for strategic communication in preparation for our training course program coming up on the 26th, which is 2 days from today. And this is the very last one. Enrollment ends today. So if by any chance you to 4 p.m. West Africa time, you see some more details in the platform on which you're watching this, you can please sign up. This is going to be a very short video. And I'm doing this in fulfillment of a request that was made to me like a year ago by someone in the development space who said they wanted to see what strategic communication looks like in the development context. Now, on the course, I'm going to be showing strategic communications in a multi-sector context, and I'm given the opportunity to do this in a development space because I see that there's not a lot supporting development communications people. In the last cohort that we had a number of people in the development field, and so we created content for them and we put it in the third cohort session. The next session that we're doing so far, we don't have any development people, I don't think so. If you're coming in, you know, if you would like to be part of that session, that's fine. But anyways, I'm going to run you through this very, very fast. So the strategic communications framework is one of the things we're going to be talking about on that in the session on Thursday. We're going to be deep diving into it, as well as the stakeholder management framework and a whole lot of things, leadership, communications, reputation management, bringing it all together, KPIs, measurements, and all of that. But I want to run through the development communication context and what it's like to, let me see, what it's like to do strategic communications in development context. So first of all, this is sort of like a 6-step model that I'm bringing here. There's a much bigger elongated version, which I sort of like do in the classes, but this is like an abridged version. So yeah, so like I was saying, so the framework it's a step-by-step model. Strategic communication is defined as the purposeful use of communication to enable an organization or a business or an institution to achieve their desired objective. So going with that definition, let's say if it's purposeful, then there has to be intent, then it has to be, you know, step by step and all of that. So this is my sort of model, and of course, it's not proprietary to us per se in that there is a strategic communications framework that is universal and is used by the entire practice area. But this is my sort of way, an adapted way that we use at SA&A, our way of thinking, and some of the things that we've used over time and that we've also gotten from several places in the workplace, you know, my previous working life, what I've also experienced as an independent consultant, what I see that works, and the frame of reference that I have discovered on my own. And one of the first things that I think, and I think every strategic communications expert will tell you this, all the books that exist in the world, whether you're going to university to study it, this is what they tell you. It has to start off with the overall context, the broad context of the business. In this case, if it's development context, the broad context of the organization or the institution that you are dealing with. So whether you are a humanitarian organization, whether you're like Red Cross or you're like World Health Organization or Africa Development Bank or, you know, whatever, you know, whatever it is that your context, whether it's NGO level, institutional level, policy making level, so far as development is your context, you need to understand what's going on in that space at the institutional level as a whole, not in your department. Because I think that's a problem with many people. When you are thinking, you start your thinking from, oh, yeah, our departmental realities, you know, yeah, that's not the way to do it, because your department exists to support a greater goal. So you have to start off from what that greater goal is before you then tailor, you know, your own objectives come out from that larger one. You know, let's keep that in mind. So we start off with the institutional objective, whatever that is. What's the leadership conversation? What are the leaders talking about? What is taking their attention? You know, attend those meetings. If you have opportunity to set up meetings with some of your senior leaders and find out what they're thinking and what's important to them. What's the strategic, excuse me, what's the strategic agenda for the year and maybe for the next 5 years? In other words, like for instance, maybe they're planning to say, we want to expand our operations into MENA, into Middle East and North Africa. We want to get deeper into Sub-Saharan Africa. We want to upscale the impacts. You know, we want to eradicate polio. You know, that's what is going on. We're trying to influence government a little bit more. We want to standardize our operations across countries. You know, we want to raise more money. That's another thing. What's the strategic agenda? Get that very clearly. Then what's the development objective, the broad one? at an institutional level before you now get down to specific. So if you're working for a global organization, find out what the strategic agenda is at the global level of the institution that you're supporting, and then find how that then dovetails into your local realities. I find that a lot of communications professionals are too tactical. And then you are struggling because, and for me, I'm like, why put yourself through this? If you're working for an international organization, look at the broader context of what they are doing and then localize and adapt. You don't have to start from scratch because at the end of the day, you will get the support of the organization if you're able to tie what you're doing to what is the overall strategic objective. Even if, and I know we make a lot of, this mistake comes up a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, where we're always trying to make the argument that we're different, things are different. It doesn't help you. Look for a way to adapt that global strategy to the local. So you think local, you think global, but you act local. So take the global principles, whatever they are, and then find a way to adapt it to the local. So context is everything. That's it. So in this point, you're having decisions with your business, with your institutional leaders, your development leaders, organizational leaders. If it's an external communications agenda or an external influencing or a outward driven thing that you're driving, which in most development scenarios it is, then you get that perspective for what you want to achieve in the outside world. But if it's organizational effectiveness that you're working on, in other words, the organization is, it's like particularly in the multinationals or those that are national or regional or policy making, you need to make yourselves a little bit more effective, and things like that. So you are now focused inward, but you still take the principles, but then you then turn it inward. So you are still getting context from the leaders, and then you then decide whether you're going to use that context to drive an internal communication strategy or an external one. Are you with me? Good. So then, after you've gotten that context, the business, the strategic agenda, the institutional agenda, the development agenda, then you now start asking who the target audience, the stakeholders, and the beneficiary of your development agenda is. And depending on which organization you work for and what you're doing, there'll be a difference between audience, which is the people that you need to communicate with internally and externally, the stakeholders, people that you need to engage and bring on side internally and externally, and then beneficiaries, the people who you are actually delivering your development action or you require those kind of changes or whatever from. So you have to do a lot of mapping and profiling here. You need to understand the values, the beliefs. This applies both in your stakeholders case as well as in your beneficiary case. Because, for instance, if you're working in a global organization and you have to deal across countries, maybe you have some policies or some there's some agendas or some interventions that you need to standardize across countries, let's say all over Africa. You need to understand, what makes West Africa different from North Africa, from Southern Africa, and, or East Africa and Central Africa. And the proclivities in each of the regions, you need to understand who are the influencers, who are the countries that are likely that if this one comes abroad, on board, it will bring the others in. Who are those that are more likely to be resistant to whatever it is we're trying to do? How do I bring them on board? So, and what level of interest and influence do they have? I mean, people in the development space understand this. So in every region of Africa, for instance, there's a leading country. In Northern America, of course, we know it's the US. If you haven't gotten the US on board, you have not started. In Europe, we know there are leading countries in Western Europe. There are leading countries in Eastern Europe. There are countries that come as a block. You are engaging the Scandinavians, you engage them as a block. So all of that mapping, you need to just do it. It's the intelligent way to work, because otherwise you're not going to get anything done. And the same thing, North Africa they're more like Middle East. So if you're engaging, you have a strategy Middle East and North Africa, and then you have a way of sort of like, you see the commonalities and then you see the differences as well. So all of that mapping, you need to do it. Everything depends on what you want to achieve. So you do all that profiling very intensely. In the development space, is very important. It's important in every space, but in the development space, even more so, because most of the time, development interventions require a deeper level of support than you do from business. And unlike development, there's no incentive for people to comply. Excuse me, most of the time. Unlike business, where there's a financial incentive, there's a transactional incentive. Development space, that may not be the case. So it really is a very much a hearts and mind space. So you have to be even more intentional about understanding who your audience is, or who the beneficiaries or the stakeholders are, the influencers in that space, and what you need to do to get them on board and achieve your objectives. Strategic communications, actually, I would say it's at its highest in development phases, or it needs to be at its highest rather, development, public sector, and political, because those are the ones that really, those areas, the influence that you exert really affects the quality of people's lives on a daily basis. Business side, it depends on what you're doing on the business side before it impacts people. But development space, it can make the difference between, in a natural disaster, in a national disaster, in an epidemic, in a pandemic, public policy and all of that, they affect people's lives on the daily. So it's very different. So once we've done all of that mapping here, we've determined the interest and the influence of the stakeholders. We do this again. We show you how to do a stakeholder mapping in the session on Thursday. And then you then talk about the culture of the community or the whoever, the nation or whoever it is you're dealing with. Then what are the development goals? In other words, what it is we're trying to do in that place, And then this is where you now get to the messaging and the influencing strategy. Now, in development communications, again, like I said, strategic communications is the same across sectors, but there's some models that are particular or more relevant in the development phase. One of them is the behavioral change model, change communications model. Actually, I should have that in. There's a behavioral change model, and then there's a behavioral change communications model, which is BCCM. And there are different ones. I think the UN, different models, you can look them up anyways, but you have to have, if you're in the development space, you need to have a behavioral change communications model that you're working with. You choose the one that works for you and you apply it. And in that, you have to find out what the enablers and what the blockers are. So whatever it is you're asking people to do, whether it's to take a vaccine, to change their water and sanitation habits, or to, adopt certain interventions and things like that, you have to take a systemic look and look at what is it that needs to be done to enable them to do so, and what are the institutional or the community related or the structural or the process or the attitudinal or the educational things that are blocking it. And then you find a way of lifting those blockers, because if you don't, first of all, if you don't identify and acknowledge those blockers, you're not likely to even achieve what you want. So don't assume that a community, don't just make assumptions, and don't try and role play one, copy and paste what you learned from one community into another. You really have to go in with a open and blank sheet, and you discover a lot in that process. Then you understand the power and influence structures. This is very key, particularly in grassroots communities. Anybody in development context will know that, because if you don't understand those power and influencing structures, they will resist you. They will make sure that whatever it is you're trying to achieve does not work. You may not even have the opportunity to come back again. They may drive you out, and that's the end. So all of that, you do all of this gathering and censoring in a very discreet relationship way, using familiar faces and things like that, engaging. So there's a lot of stakeholder engagement in the development world. Again, this is where it's different from the business and the organizational world, because the business and organizational world, you may not engage at all in this stage of the process. In your step 3, you probably you could just be doing all your listening through social media and all of that to get the data that you need. But in the development stage, you have to actually go physically. You have to start talking to people. You have to start consulting, doing your needs assessment and things like that, and talking to people and getting their insights before you even develop a strategy of if, what, when, how you're going to launch into that community or whatever it is you're trying to do. If you fail, in fact, I would say this in step 2 and step 3, if you fail in those 2 stages, you are going to fail all the way here. You are really going to have problem in your implementation. As in, failure starts here. Now, what step 1 does for you is, at step 1, if you don't do step 1 well, you will fail in terms of measurement and KPIs, because your leaders, you won't have that context that is required for you to, first of all, know what you should be paying attention to, knowing what success looks like from the definition of your donors or your institutional leaders or whoever it is that you're answering to or that is funding your project. Therefore, by the time you now do your reports and everything, nobody's happy with you, and people then begin to give you feedback that you didn't hit the mark. But then you didn't miss it here, neither did you miss it here, you missed it here. So this, number 1, has impact on your step 5. Number 2 and 3 have impact on your step 4. So now, environmental factors, you know what's going on in the entire space. This one is very important in the development space. Again, environmental factors are important in business, and in fact, business and organization. But I would say in scale of reference, I would say development is the highest